Last Tuesday, my phone rang at 2 in the morning with a number I knew by heart, and a voice I never expected to hear breaking like glass. Sarah Mitchell, my wife's best friend since college, sobbing so hard she could barely form words. When she finally managed to speak, she said 5 words that ended one life and started another. "Marcus, she's been cheating on you." Just like that, in a hospital parking lot under sodium lights, holding a thermos of coffee gone cold, I learned that the woman I'd spent 9 years loving had spent the last 18 months loving someone else. If you think loyalty dies with a bang, you're wrong. It dies with a phone call from the person who couldn't watch the lie anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marcus Webb, and I fix things for a living. Pipe fitter, local union out of Pittsburgh, the kind of trade where you spend half your day in crawl spaces and the other half explaining to homeowners why their shortcuts cost triple to repair. I'm 37, drive a Silverado with a dent in the tailgate from a ladder I forgot to secure, and I can tell you the exact temperature where PVC gets brittle. My father laid pipe for the mill. My grandfather before him worked the furnaces until his lungs gave out. We're the kind of family that understands heat, pressure, and what happens when a seal breaks under load. I never thought I'd need that education for my marriage, but there I was, learning that everything I thought was solid had been leaking for over a year. Emily and I met at a backyard barbecue in the kind of June that makes you believe in permanence. She wore a yellow sundress and laughed at my joke about galvanized threading, which should have been my first clue she was special because nobody laughs at pipe jokes. We dated through a summer that smelled like cut grass and cheap beer, got engaged on a pier where I'd saved 3 months of overtime to afford a ring that caught the light just right. The wedding was small, her parents' farmhouse outside Harrisburg, string lights in the oak trees, and a playlist she spent weeks perfecting. I remember dancing with her while crickets sang backup and thinking I'd found the blueprint for happy. 9 years later, I was standing in a hospital parking lot realizing the blueprint had been drawn in disappearing ink. Sarah's call came because her husband Tom had been rushed to the ER with appendicitis. She'd been sitting in that waiting room for hours, watching couples hold hands and families pray together, when something in her cracked. Guilt works like rust. It starts small, invisible, eating away at the metal until one day the whole structure fails. She told me she'd known for over a year. That Emily had confided in her during a girls' weekend in the Poconos, drunk on margaritas and bad decisions, laughing about the thrill of it like it was a hobby instead of a demolition. Sarah said she tried to talk Emily out of it, tried to convince her to end it, to tell me, to do anything but keep pretending. But Emily had smiled and said I'd never find out, that I was too busy working to notice, too trusting to question. Sarah said those words haunted her every time she sat at our dinner table, every time I asked her how Tom was doing, every time she looked me in the eye and said nothing. I stood there in that parking lot, phone pressed so hard to my ear it left a mark, and I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I asked one question. Who? Sarah hesitated, then said his name like she was handing me a loaded weapon. Derek Holloway. The regional manager from Emily's accounting firm, the one who'd been promoted 6 months into their affair, the one who'd given her a company car and flexible hours and all the cover she needed. I knew the name. I'd met him at the Christmas party, shaken his hand, listened to him talk about quarterly projections while Emily freshened her drink. He had soft hands, the kind that never held a wrench, and a smile that belonged on a motivational poster. I remembered thinking he seemed harmless, the way you think about smoke before you realize the building's on fire. Sarah kept apologizing, words tumbling over each other like they could cushion the impact. I'm so sorry, I should have told you sooner, I couldn't keep lying, Tom told me I had to tell you, please don't hate me. I let her finish because people need to say what they need to say, even when it changes nothing. When she finally went quiet, I thanked her. My voice didn't shake. I told her she did the right thing, that Tom was lucky to have her, that I hoped his surgery went well. Then I hung up and stared at the emergency room entrance where people rushed in carrying pain and rushed out carrying relief. I was somewhere in between, holding hurt that hadn't fully registered yet, waiting for the anesthetic of shock to wear off. The thing about betrayal at 2 in the morning is that you can't immediately act on it. The world is closed. People are sleeping. You're standing in a parking lot with nowhere to go and a truth too big to fit back into ignorance. So I did what men like me do when the systems fail. I started taking inventory. I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar, scrolling back 18 months, looking for the seams in the story I'd been sold. The late meetings that ran past midnight. The weekend conference in Atlantic City where she came home with a tan and no business cards. The new lingerie I found in the laundry, tag still on, that she said was for me but never wore when I was around. The way she started going to the gym at 5 in the morning, coming home flushed and showering immediately. I believed every explanation because I'm the kind of man who assumes the pipes are sound until the ceiling caves in. I drove home slowly, under the speed limit for the first time in years, taking back roads I usually avoid because the direct route felt too honest. The house was dark except for the porch light I'd installed with a motion sensor so Emily wouldn't have to fumble for keys. I'd replaced the bulb 2 weeks ago, made sure it was LED so it would last. Funny how you maintain a life that's already abandoned you. I parked in the driveway and sat with the engine off, watching our bedroom window for movement. The curtains I'd hung last spring didn't twitch. Inside, my wife was sleeping, probably dreaming, definitely not thinking about the phone call that had just redrawn our future. I didn't go in right away. Men over 30 know the value of a pause, the space between knowing and doing where decisions get made that you can't unmake. I thought about kicking the door open, flipping on every light, demanding answers with the kind of volume that wakes neighbors. I thought about packing a bag and disappearing into a motel where the ice machine hums and the walls remember other people's endings. I thought about calling Derek Holloway and introducing myself in a way he'd feel in the morning. But rage is a accelerant, and I'd seen enough flash fires to know they burn the person holding the match. So I sat in my truck, hands on the wheel, breathing like a man trying to remember why control matters. What I wanted was something cleaner than chaos. I wanted the kind of ending that didn't leave me worse than I started. Sarah's confession was a gift, even if it felt like a grenade. She'd given me information, and information is leverage. In my trade, we call it having the specs before the job starts. You don't swing a hammer until you know what you're building. I wasn't building anymore. I was dismantling. But I'd do it with precision, not fury. I'd take apart a marriage the way I'd take apart a faulty system, methodically, documenting everything, leaving no room for argument about what failed and why. I pulled out a notebook from the glove box, the kind with grid paper I use for sketching pipe runs, and I started writing. Not feelings, not accusations, just facts. 18 months. Derek Holloway. Regional Manager. Company car. Atlantic City. Morning gym sessions. New phone passcode she changed 3 months ago. Separate checking account she opened for budget reasons that I never questioned. The weekend she said she was visiting her sister in Ohio but her sister posted photos from a wedding in Vermont. I filled 2 pages with breadcrumbs I'd ignored because I was too busy earning the money she was spending on a life that didn't include me. By the time I finished, the sun was starting to think about rising, and I had the outline of a plan that didn't require me to raise my voice once. When I finally walked into the house, it was 5:15, early enough that Emily wouldn't question why I was up, late enough that I looked like I'd been working overnight emergency calls. I moved through the kitchen quietly, started the coffee maker, set out her favorite mug with the chipped handle she refuses to replace. I made toast, buttered it the way she likes, set it on a plate with the strawberry jam she buys from the farmer's market. I did all of this with the mechanical kindness of a man who'd done it 1,000 times, because habit is a language the guilty understand. When she came downstairs, hair in a messy bun, wearing my old Steelers shirt, she smiled at me like nothing in the world had shifted overnight. "Morning, babe," she said, voice still soft with sleep. She kissed my cheek and reached for the coffee, inhaling the steam like it was a sacrament. I watched her and felt nothing, which was somehow worse than feeling everything. She asked if I'd slept okay. I said fine, which was technically true if you count sitting in a truck staring at your life as a form of rest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She scrolled her phone while she ate, laughing at something I couldn't see, and I wondered if she was texting him, if he knew that last night her best friend had burned down the cover they'd built together. I didn't ask. Men like me understand that questions are for when you need information. I already had what I needed. Emily talked about her day, the usual rhythm of client meetings and deadlines, mentions of people whose names I'd stopped tracking because they all sounded the same. She said she might be late, that Derek, her voice didn't even catch on his name, wanted to go over the quarterly reports before the board meeting. I nodded, sipped my coffee, said that's fine, I've got a big job in Cranberry anyway, might not be home until 8 or 9. She smiled, relieved, and I saw it then, the small relaxation in her shoulders that comes when an obstacle moves itself out of the way. I was the obstacle. My presence, my schedule, my expectation of a wife who came home. She'd been managing me like a project, and I'd been too busy holding up my end to notice she'd stopped holding hers. After she left, perfume lingering in the hallway like evidence, I stood in our bedroom and started looking. Not frantically, not like a man tearing apart couch cushions, but carefully, like a man checking for code violations. I opened her nightstand. Beneath the hand lotion and the book she'd been reading for 6 months was a burner phone, cheap flip model, no contacts saved, just a call log of one number repeated like a heartbeat. I didn't touch it. I took a photo with my own phone, made sure the screen was clear, the number visible. In her closet, behind the winter coats we wouldn't need for months, I found receipts. Boutique hotels in neighborhoods we'd never visited together. Dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford on overtime. Lingerie purchases that never made it into our bed. I photographed everything, not because I needed proof for myself, I believed Sarah, but because I'd need proof for what came next. I called in sick to work, something I haven't done in 3 years, and I spent the day building a case the way a lawyer would, the way my union rep taught us to document grievances so management can't wriggle free. I opened a new email account, not connected to anything she could trace, and I started forwarding myself copies of everything. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals that didn't match her explanations. Credit card charges at places she claimed she'd never been. Text threads I pulled from the cloud backup she didn't know I had access to, years of messages that got progressively more careful, more coded, more aware that they were writing evidence. I didn't read them all. I didn't need the details of their affection. I just needed the timestamps, the patterns, the undeniable map of deception. By noon, I had a file thick enough to choke on. I saved it, backed it up, printed a hard copy, and sealed it in an envelope I labeled with today's date. Then I made a list, the kind that keeps a man sane when the world stops making sense. Attorney. Locksmith. Bank. Accountant. Storage unit. Each item was a step toward an exit I hadn't wanted but wouldn't avoid. People think divorce is about feelings. It isn't. It's about assets, timelines, and who gets the coffee maker. I wasn't interested in revenge. Revenge is what happens when you let emotion drive. I was interested in results, in walking away with my dignity and enough of my savings to start over without starting from zero. I called my buddy Rick, the one who went through his own divorce 2 years back, lost his house but kept his tools and his sanity. I asked him for his lawyer's name. He didn't ask why. Men like us know better. He texted me a number and said, "She's expensive but she's mean, which is what you want." I called, got an appointment for Thursday, 2 days away, enough time to keep pretending, not enough time to lose my nerve. The receptionist asked what the consultation was regarding. I said dissolution of marriage, and hearing those words out loud made it real in a way that even Sarah's phone call hadn't. I was about to legally end the thing I'd legally started 9 years ago, and the symmetry of it felt cold and necessary. Wednesday, I went to work because men like me don't stop showing up just because life gets hard. I crawled into a basement that smelled like mildew and bad choices, replaced a section of cast iron that had been leaking for months, and I thought about how people ignore problems until they become emergencies. The homeowner kept apologizing for not calling sooner. I told him it happens, that most folks don't see the damage until it's too late. He nodded, grateful, and handed me a check that I deposited on my way home. Money doesn't care about your personal life. It just keeps moving, and you've got to keep earning it or you drown. Emily was home when I got there, earlier than expected, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and a smile that looked practiced. She patted the cushion next to her. I sat, boots still on, jeans still dirty, and she wrinkled her nose in that playful way that used to make me laugh. "You smell like work," she said. I said that's because I was working, and she rolled her eyes like I'd missed the joke. She asked if I wanted to order takeout, maybe watch a movie, have a night in like we used to. I looked at her, at the woman I'd promised forever, and I saw a stranger wearing a face I used to trust. I said sure, sounds good, and I meant it the way you mean anything that buys you time. We ordered Thai food, the same dishes we always get, and we sat on opposite ends of the couch pretending to watch a thriller neither of us cared about. She laughed at a scene that wasn't funny. I commented on the plot like I was following it. We performed marriage, hitting the marks, saying the lines, and I wondered how long we'd been doing this, acting instead of living. When the credits rolled, she yawned, said she was exhausted, kissed my forehead, and went upstairs. I stayed on the couch, listening to the water run in the bathroom above me, the creak of the bed as she settled in, the silence that followed. I didn't join her. I told myself I'd be up in a minute, then an hour, then I just slept where I was, fully clothed, dreaming about leaks I couldn't find in pipes that burst in slow motion. Thursday morning, I put on the one suit I own, the charcoal one I bought for weddings and funerals, and I drove downtown to an office tower that smelled like ambition and lemon polish. The lawyer, Patricia Chen, had a corner office with a view of the river and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She asked me what I had, and I slid the envelope across her desk like I was delivering a subpoena. She opened it, read in silence, flipping pages with the efficiency of someone who'd seen this story in 100 different fonts. When she finished, she looked at me with something that might have been respect. "This is thorough," she said. "You've done my job for me." I told her I'm a tradesman, that documentation is how you prove the work was done right. She smiled, sharp and quick, and said then you know we're building a case, not a grudge. I nodded. She walked me through the process, timelines, costs, expectations. Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state, she explained, which means fair, not equal. With this kind of evidence, she said, tapping the envelope, we're in a strong position. Infidelity doesn't affect asset division directly, but it affects credibility, and credibility affects everything else. I asked how long. She said 6 months if it's uncontested, longer if she fights. I asked what it would cost. She named a number that made my jaw tight but didn't shock me. You pay for quality, same as anything else. I wrote a check for the retainer, the kind of amount that used to mean a vacation or a new water heater, and I watched her receipt it with the indifference of someone who signs checks all day. She said she'd file the petition by Monday, that Emily would be served at work, that I should prepare for the conversation that would follow. I asked if I needed to be there when it happened. She said no, that in fact it was better if I wasn't, that the goal was information delivery, not confrontation. She told me to change my passwords, open a separate bank account, forward my mail to a P.O. box, take half of any joint savings before she could. I nodded at each instruction, writing notes in the same grid notebook where I'd first started mapping my exit. Before I left, Patricia asked me a question that lawyers probably ask everyone. Do you want this marriage to end, or do you want her to hurt? I didn't hesitate. I want it to end clean, I said. I've got no interest in making her suffer. I just want out with enough of myself left to build something new. She studied me for a second, then nodded. That's the right answer, she said. The ones who want blood usually end up bleeding out themselves. I shook her hand again, walked out into a day that felt brighter than it had any right to, and I realized that for the first time since Sarah's call, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. I had a plan. I had representation. I had a way forward that didn't require me to beg or break. The weekend was strange in the way that last things always are. Emily suggested we go to the farmer's market, the one we used to visit every Saturday before life got busy and routines got lazy. We walked through stalls selling tomatoes and honey, and she held my hand like we were a couple in a commercial for something wholesome. I bought her a bouquet of sunflowers because they were her favorite, and she kissed me in front of the flower stand like we were worth photographing. I felt like an actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for, reading lines from a script that no longer made sense. But I played along because Monday was coming, and Monday would rewrite everything. Sunday night, she made dinner, pasta with the sauce she makes from scratch, garlic bread that fills the house with the smell of normal. We ate at the table instead of in front of the TV, and she talked about plans for the fall, a trip to the mountains maybe, or finally painting the guest room. I listened and said things like that sounds nice, or we should look into that, knowing that we wouldn't, that there was no we left to make plans. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back because kindness doesn't have to be honest to be kind. After dinner, we did the dishes together, her washing, me drying, and I thought about how many times we'd stood at this sink, in this routine, building a life that had quietly collapsed while we weren't paying attention. Monday morning, I kissed her goodbye like I always did, told her to have a good day, watched her drive away in the sedan I'd co-signed for. I waited 5 minutes, then I called Patricia. "It's go time," I said. She said the process server would be there by 11, that I should keep my phone on, that Emily would likely call. I asked if I should answer. She said that was up to me, but that anything I said could become part of the record, so maybe silence was smarter. I thanked her, hung up, and I sat in the quiet of a house that was about to become a crime scene of trust. At 10:53, my phone buzzed. Emily's name on the screen, the photo from our honeymoon where she's laughing at something I said that I can't remember anymore. I let it ring. She called. Again. I let it ring. A text came through. "Call me. Now." Then another. "What the hell is this?" Then a third. "Are you serious right now?" I turned the phone face down and walked outside, into a day that didn't care about my drama, and I mowed the lawn because the grass doesn't stop growing just because your life is ending. By noon, my phone had 17 missed calls and a voicemail I didn't listen to. I finished the lawn, edged the driveway, trimmed the hedges, and I worked until my shirt stuck to my back and my mind went blank with the rhythm of physical tasks. When I finally checked my phone, there was one new message, not from Emily, from Sarah. She'd written, "I heard. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." I texted back, "You gave me the truth. That's the only thing I deserved." She sent a heart emoji, and I pocketed the phone. Emily came home at 4, earlier than ever, and I heard her car before I saw it, the engine revving in a way that said she'd been driving angry. She slammed the door, heels clicking across the driveway like punctuation marks, and she stormed into the garage where I was organizing tools I didn't need to organize. Her face was red, her eyes wet, and she was holding the papers in one hand like they were evidence of my betrayal instead of hers. "What the hell is this, Marcus?" she shouted, and her voice cracked on my name. I set down the wrench I was holding and looked at her the way you look at a problem you've already solved. "Divorce papers," I said. "I think that's pretty clear." She stared at me like I'd spoken a language she didn't recognize. "You can't be serious," she said. "We can work this out, we can go to therapy, we can." I held up a hand. "I know about Derek," I said. The name landed between us like a dropped tool. Her face went through a sequence: confusion, fear, calculation, denial. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of the burner phone call log, and held it up. She looked, and I watched the color drain from her face in real time. "Who told you?" she whispered, and I knew then that she wasn't denying it, just trying to figure out how the dam had broken. "Does it matter?" I asked. She started to cry, the kind of tears that are part sorry and part strategy, and she reached for me. "Marcus, please, it was a mistake, it didn't mean anything. I love you, we can fix this." I stepped back, not angrily, just firmly, the way you step back from a flame. "It meant 18 months, Emily," I said. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. She crumpled, literally sank down onto the concrete floor of the garage, and she sobbed in a way that might have moved me if I hadn't spent the last week moving myself. I didn't yell. I didn't call her names. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, waiting for the storm to pass. When she finally looked up, mascara streaked, she asked the question I had been expecting. "What do you want?" "I want a divorce," I said. "I want it clean, quick, and fair. You sign the papers, we split what's ours, and we both move on." She shook her head. "I'm not signing anything," she said. "You can't just throw away 9 years." I crouched down, met her eyes, and spoke in the calm voice I use when I'm explaining why a repair costs what it costs. "I'm not throwing it away," I said. "You already did. I'm just cleaning up the mess." She tried arguing, pleading, bargaining, all the stages of grief compressed into a garage that smelled like motor oil and regret. I let her talk until she ran out of words, and then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and walked into the house. She followed, still crying, asking what she was supposed to do now, where she was supposed to go. I told her she could stay here until we figured out the details, that I'd sleep in the guest room, that we'd be civil because adults don't have a choice. She asked if I hated her. I said no, which was true. Hate requires energy I didn't have. I just wanted distance, and distance requires boundaries, not emotion. That night, I lay in the guest bed that still smelled like the detergent I used on sheets no one slept on, and I listened to her cry through the wall. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to go back to being the man who fixed her problems, but I knew that man had been fixing the wrong things. I'd been so busy keeping the house standing that I hadn't noticed she'd already moved out emotionally. So I stayed where I was, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, and I let her have her grief alone the same way I'd had mine. The next weeks were a study in uncomfortable coexistence. We moved around each other like roommates with a bad history, polite but distant, speaking only about logistics. Who would take the trash out, whose turn it was to buy milk, when the realtor was coming to appraise the house. Patricia filed motions, Emily hired her own attorney, a man named Gregory something who sent letters full of words like reconciliation and premature. But the evidence was the evidence, and even he couldn't argue with phone records and hotel receipts. Emily tried twice more to change my mind, once with tears, once with anger, and both times I responded the same way. I listened, I acknowledged, and I held my line. Sarah called me once, asking if I was okay. I told her I was, which wasn't exactly true but wasn't exactly false either. She said Emily had stopped talking to her, that their friendship was probably over, and I told her that wasn't her fault. "You did what was right," I said. "Sometimes that costs, but it's still right." She thanked me, and I heard relief in her voice, like she'd been waiting for permission to stop carrying guilt that wasn't hers. Tom's appendix healed. My marriage didn't. Those were just facts, neither more or less important than the other. By the end of the month, the house was under contract, sold to a young couple who walked through holding hands and talking about paint colors. Emily signed the papers without looking at me. I signed them in front of a notary who asked if we were sure, which is legally required but emotionally useless. We were sure. Sure that it was over, sure that we'd failed, sure that moving forward separately was better than standing still together. The closing was set for 60 days out, enough time to pack up 9 years of shared life and figure out where we'd go when the door closed behind us for the last time. I found an apartment near the job sites I work most, a 1-bedroom with decent water pressure and a parking spot that fits my truck. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned and hadn't spent on someone else's secrets. I signed the lease, got the keys, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. The kind you feel when you walk onto a job site with a clean blueprint and enough materials to build something solid. Emily moved in with her sister temporarily, the one in Ohio who'd covered for her that weekend she wasn't really visiting. I wondered if her sister knew she'd been part of the lie, or if Emily had lied to everyone, including the people she thought were helping her. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. I packed my tools first, then my clothes, then the few things that mattered, photos of my parents, my grandfather's level, a mug from the Union Hall. Everything else could stay or go. I wasn't attached to furniture that had witnessed a betrayal. The day I moved out, Emily wasn't there. She'd asked to be gone, and I'd agreed because last moments don't need an audience. I walked through the empty rooms one final time, checking that I hadn't left anything behind, and I realized I felt lighter. Not happy, not sad, just unburdened. I locked the door, left the keys on the counter per the agreement, and I drove away from a house that had been a home until it wasn't. At the apartment, I unpacked methodically, putting tools where I could reach them, hanging clothes in a closet that held only my decisions. I made the bed with new sheets I'd bought from a big box store, navy blue because I liked them and didn't have to ask anyone's opinion. I brewed coffee in a machine that was just mine, sat on a couch I'd picked out in 30 minutes, and I looked around at a space that reflected no compromises. It wasn't much, but it was honest. The divorce finalized 4 months after it started. Emily contested nothing in the end, signed everything her lawyer put in front of her, and we split assets down a line that Patricia drew with the precision of a surgeon. I kept my truck, my tools, my retirement account. She kept her car, her furniture, her regret. We were both poorer in dollars and richer in clarity, which is the exchange rate of failed marriages. The judge signed the decree on a Thursday, and by Friday I was legally single, a status that felt both strange and correct. I ran into Derek Holloway once, in a grocery store parking lot, purely by accident. He saw me, his face went pale, and he started to walk the other direction. I didn't chase him. I didn't confront him. I just watched him scurry away like a man who knows he's been weighed and found wanting, and I felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, just the neutral observation that some people are built from cheaper materials and it shows under stress. Sarah texted me on what would have been my 10th anniversary. "Thinking of you today," she wrote. "Hope you're doing okay." I wrote back, "I'm good, thanks for checking in." And I meant it. I was good, not in the way that means everything's perfect, but in the way that means I'm standing on solid ground again. I'd rebuilt after the demolition, not the same structure, but something new, something that could hold weight without leaking. If you asked me now what I learned, I'd tell you this. Betrayal isn't the end unless you let it be. It's information, painful information, but data you can use to build better. I learned I'm stronger than I thought, that I can walk away from something I wanted to keep if keeping it means losing myself. I learned that loyalty is valuable but wasted on people who don't return it. I learned that starting over at 37 is scary but possible, and that the man I'm becoming respects himself more than the man I was. So here's my question for you, the one I'm asking man to man, human to human. If someone you trusted gave you the truth that destroyed your peace, would you thank them or blame them? Sarah Mitchell blew up my life to save it. Was she right to tell me, or should she have let me keep living the lie? Drop a comment with tell or protect and explain why. And if you think this story ends here, you're wrong. Tomorrow, I'm sharing what happened when Emily called me 6 months later, crying, asking if we could try again. You won't believe what I said. 6 months after the ink dried on paperwork that turned us into strangers with a shared history, my phone lit up with her name at 11 on a Sunday night. Emily Webb, except the system still remembered her maiden name, Emily Carson, the version of her that existed before she became my wife and then my ex-wife. I was replacing the trap under my kitchen sink, the kind of late-night repair you do when you can't sleep and need your hands to remember what competence feels like. The phone buzzed against the laminate countertop, her contact photo still the one from our engagement, her laughing at something I'd said about provincial plumbing codes. I almost didn't answer. Men who've been burned learn caution around old flames. But curiosity is a powerful thing, stronger than wisdom sometimes, and I dried my hands on a towel that used to be ours and swiped to accept. Before I could say anything, I heard it. Crying, the deep kind that comes from somewhere past the throat, past the chest, from that place where regret lives with all its furniture moved in permanent. "Marcus," she said, and my name in her mouth sounded like an apology she hadn't earned the right to make yet. I didn't hang up. I also didn't rush to comfort. I just held the phone and waited because men my age have learned that silence is a tool more useful than words. She cried for what felt like 5 minutes but was probably 90 seconds, those stretched out moments where someone's pain fills all the available space and you're just a witness to it. When she finally caught her breath, she said the sentence I'd been half expecting and half dreading since the day I moved out. I made a mistake, Marcus. The biggest mistake of my life. Can we talk? I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built from scratch after she'd demolished the one we'd shared. Clean counters, a couch nobody else had picked out, a coffee table without ring stains from her wine glasses. I'd built something small and honest here, and the sound of her voice felt like a crack forming in the foundation. I told her I'd think about it, which was neither yes nor no, just the kind of noncommittal response that buys time when you don't trust your own judgment. She asked if we could meet for coffee, somewhere neutral, somewhere we used to go. I said maybe, hung up before she could press harder, and I sat on my kitchen floor with a wrench in one hand and a phone in the other, trying to figure out which tool I needed more. The trap could wait. My head couldn't. I called Rick, the buddy who'd been through his own marital implosion, and I asked him the question men ask each other when they're standing at a crossroads with poor visibility. Rick answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the sound of late-night television and the kind of loneliness that comes from living alone when you didn't plan to. I told him about the call, about Emily's tears, about the request to meet. He was quiet for a beat, then he said something I'll probably remember the rest of my life. She's not calling because she misses you, Marcus. She's calling because she misses who she was when she had you. There's a difference, and you need to know which one you're dealing with before you show up. I thanked him, said I owed him a beer, and hung up knowing he was right but also knowing I'd probably meet her anyway because some lessons you have to learn in person. Tuesday afternoon, I texted her the name of a diner we'd never been to together, far enough from our old neighborhood that we wouldn't run into anyone who remembered us as a unit. She responded within seconds, a time and a thank you that felt too eager, like she'd been holding her phone waiting for my reply. I showed up 15 minutes early out of habit, the same instinct that makes me arrive at job sites before the crew so I can walk the space alone and get my bearings. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and hash browns, the kind of place where the menu is laminated and the waitress calls everyone hon. Emily walked in exactly on time, and I watched her scan the room before her eyes landed on me. She looked different, thinner maybe, or just worn in a way that 6 months can do when you're living with consequences. She'd cut her hair shorter, just past her shoulders now instead of the long waves she used to spend 20 minutes straightening every morning. She wore jeans and a sweater I didn't recognize, and for a moment I felt like I was meeting someone I used to know rather than someone I used to love. She slid into the booth across from me, and the first thing she said was I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure I would either, I said, and it was the truth delivered without malice. The waitress appeared with coffee neither of us had ordered yet, and Emily wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to borrow its warmth. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that used to be comfortable and now felt like a test we were both failing. She opened her mouth twice before words came out, and when they did, they arrived in a rush. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know I destroy us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Every single day I'm sorry. Apologies are strange currency. They cost the person giving them almost nothing and demand that the person receiving them do all the work of deciding what they're worth. I sipped my coffee, which tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since breakfast, and I studied her face for signs of what Rick had warned me about. Was this genuine remorse or just the discomfort of living with a choice that turned out worse than expected? I asked her the only question that mattered. Why now, Emily? 6 months of silence and you call me on a Sunday night. Why? She looked down at her mug, at the surface of coffee that reflected the overhead lights and tiny constellations. Derek and I broke up, she said quietly. 3 weeks ago. And I've been sitting in my sister's guest room every night realizing that I gave up something real for something that was never going to last. I nodded, not because I agreed but because I understood. The affair had run its natural course, burned through the fantasy fuel that keeps those things going, and crashed into the reality that people who cheat with you will probably cheat on you, I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. The look on her face told me she'd already learned it the hard way. She talked for 20 minutes straight, words pouring out like she'd been storing them in a reservoir and the dam had finally failed. She told me Derek had been different once the secrecy was gone, that without the thrill of hiding he'd become demanding, critical, always comparing her to the woman he'd left for her. She told me he'd started seeing someone else, another woman from the office, and that she'd found out the same way I had, through someone who couldn't watch the lie anymore. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. She'd been betrayed by the person she'd betrayed me for, and now she understood the math of infidelity, how it compounds interest on pain you thought you'd already paid. I'm not telling you this to make excuses, she said, her voice cracking on the last word. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that losing you was the real loss. Everything else was just noise. I set my coffee down, and the ceramic made a sound against the formica that felt too loud for the moment. Emily, I said, choosing my words the way I choose pipe fittings, for function not decoration. You didn't lose me. You traded me. There's a difference. Losing something means it was taken from you. Trading means you saw something you wanted more and made a choice. She started crying then, not the wailing from the phone call but quieter tears that ran down her face and dripped onto the table. I didn't reach across to comfort her. That wasn't cruelty. It was boundary maintenance. She wiped her face with a napkin and said the thing I'd known was coming since the moment she'd asked to meet. I want to try again, Marcus. I want us to try again. I know it's asking too much, I know you have every right to say no, but I love you. I never stopped loving you. I just lost my way. The words hung between us like a proposition waiting for a vote. Part of me, the part that remembered the good years, the part that had loved her enough to marry her, wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that people can change, that mistakes can be corrected, that love is sturdy enough to survive demolition and rebuild from the rubble. But the larger part of me, the part that had spent 6 months learning how to sleep alone and trust myself again, knew better. Love isn't enough if the foundation is cracked. And our foundation hadn't just cracked. It had been intentionally undermined for 18 months. I can't, Emily, I said, and I watched her face collapse in real time. Not won't. Can't. Because even if I wanted to forgive you, and I'm not saying I do, I don't trust you. And without trust, we're just two people pretending to be something we're not. She shook her head like she could physically reject my answer. We could go to counseling, she said, desperation making her voice higher. We could take it slow, we could rebuild. I've changed, Marcus. I'm not the person who did that to you. Maybe you have changed, I said. I hope you have. But I've changed too, and the person I am now doesn't want to spend the next year wondering if you're telling the truth every time you're late coming home. I don't want to check your phone or track your location or live like a detective in my own relationship. That's not a marriage. That's a surveillance state. And I'd rather be alone than live like that. She reached across the table then, her hand landing on mine, and I felt the familiar shape of her fingers, the wedding ring she'd stopped wearing replaced by nothing. Please, she whispered. I'm begging you. Don't throw away everything we had. I pulled my hand back, gently but firmly, and I said the thing that needed saying. I'm not throwing it away, Emily. It's already gone. You can't unburn a house. You can build a new one on the same lot, but it won't be the same house. And honestly, I don't want to live in a new house with the same person who burned down the old one. She flinched like I'd struck her, and maybe in a way I had. Truth delivered clearly can hurt worse than a fist. We sat there for another few minutes, the silence different now, heavier, final. She asked if we could at least stay in touch, maybe be friends eventually. I told her I didn't think that was possible, that friendship requires trust too, and we'd have to build that from scratch if we built it at all. Maybe someday, I said, though I didn't believe it. Someday is what you say when you mean probably never but don't want to close the door with a slam. She nodded, gathered her purse, and stood on legs that looked unsteady. Before she left, she said one more thing. I hope you find someone who deserves you, Marcus. Because I didn't. That was the truest thing she'd said all afternoon. I watched her walk out of the diner, shoulders curved inward like she was protecting something fragile, and I felt a complicated mix of sadness and relief. Sad for what we'd been, relief for what I wasn't going back to. The waitress came by with the check, and I paid for both coffees we'd barely touched because some gestures are about closing accounts, not generosity. I drove home through streets that had nothing to do with our shared history, and I felt lighter despite the conversation's weight. Back at my apartment, I finished fixing the sink I'd started the night she called. The trap seated perfectly, no leaks, the kind of repair that lasts because you did it right the first time. I tested the faucet, watched clear water circle the drain and disappear, and I thought about how some things are worth fixing and some things are worth replacing. My marriage had been worth trying to fix right up until it wasn't. Now it was just a thing that used to work, and I was okay with that. The next morning, I got a text from Sarah. Heard Emily reached out. You okay? I replied that I was, that we'd talked, that I'd said no. She sent back a simple thumbs up and the words proud of you. That meant something, coming from the person who'd handed me the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I texted back thanks for everything, and I meant it in a way that covered more ground than 2 words should be able to. Work picked up in the way work does when seasons change and people remember their houses need attention. I spent long days in basements and crawl spaces, replacing corroded pipes and updating systems that hadn't been touched since the previous century. Physical labor is a kind of meditation when you let it be. Your mind goes quiet, your hands take over, and by the end of the day you've got something concrete to show for your time. A system that works. A problem solved. A customer satisfied. One Thursday, I was under a house in Shadyside, lying on my back in dirt that smelled like 100 years of settling, when my apprentice called down through the access hatch. Marcus, there's someone here to see you. I slid out, brushed myself off, and climbed up expecting a homeowner with questions. Instead, I found Emily's sister Rachel standing in the driveway, arms crossed, looking like she'd been working up the nerve to be there. Rachel and I had always gotten along in that surface way you get along with in-laws, polite but not particularly close. She'd been at our wedding, had us over for holidays, and had probably known about the affair long before I did. She looked uncomfortable now, shifting her weight from foot to foot, and I realized she was here on a mission she didn't particularly want to be on. Can we talk? She asked, and I nodded because refusing would have been more awkward than agreeing. We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, one of those places with exposed brick and overpriced lattes, and we sat at a table near the window where the afternoon light made everything look softer than it was. Rachel didn't waste time on small talk. Emily's a mess, she said bluntly. She's been crying every day since you 2 met at the diner. She's convinced you're the only good thing she ever had and she destroyed it. I sipped my coffee and didn't disagree because disagreeing would have required me to care more than I did. Rachel leaned forward, her expression somewhere between pleading and frustrated. I know what she did was unforgivable, she said. I told her that at the time. But she's my sister, and I'm watching her fall apart, and I guess I'm here to ask if there's any chance you'd reconsider. Not jump back into marriage, but maybe just talk to her again. Help her find some closure. I set my cup down and looked at Rachel with the kind of directness that comes from having nothing left to lose. I gave her closure, Rachel, I said. I met with her. I listened. I explained why we can't go back. That's all the closure I can provide. What she does with it is her responsibility, not mine. Rachel's face tightened. You don't understand, she said. She's not eating, she's not sleeping. I'm worried about her. I understood more than Rachel probably realized. I'd been there, in those first weeks after Sarah's call, when food tasted like cardboard and sleep felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. But I'd climbed out of that hole on my own, and Emily would have to do the same. I'm sorry she's hurting, I said, and I meant it in a distant way, the way you're sorry for strangers in the news who've lost something. But her pain doesn't obligate me to fix it. I'm not her husband anymore. I'm not even her friend. I'm just someone she used to be married to, and I'm trying to build a life that doesn't include managing her emotions. Rachel looked at me like I'd said something cruel, but I'd only said something true, and truth doesn't negotiate just because it's uncomfortable. She asked me one more time if I'd consider it, maybe just a phone call, just 5 minutes to give Emily some hope to hold on to. I told her no, firmly and finally. Hope isn't always kind, Rachel, I said. Sometimes hope keeps you stuck in a place you need to leave. Emily needs to accept that we're done, and me giving her breadcrumbs of possibility won't help her do that. It'll just drag out her suffering. Rachel stood, thanked me for my time in a voice that suggested she didn't actually feel thankful, and left me sitting with a half-finished coffee in the certainty that I'd done the right thing even though it didn't feel good. That evening, I got a long text from Emily. Rachel told me you won't talk to me again. I understand. I just want you to know that I'll always love you, and I'll always regret what I did. I hope you find happiness, Marcus. You deserve it more than anyone I know. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Some messages don't require an answer. They're just the final punctuation on a sentence that's already complete. Weeks passed and turned into months. Summer gave way to fall, and I found myself settling into routines that felt increasingly mine and decreasingly lonely. I joined a gym, not for any dramatic transformation but because my back was reminding me that 40 wasn't far off in maintenance matters. I started showing up to union meetings I'd been skipping for years, reconnecting with guys I'd worked with on jobs that felt like ancient history. I even went on a couple dates, set up by well-meaning friends who thought enough time had passed. The dates were fine, pleasant even, but I wasn't in a hurry. I'd learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and I was more interested in getting reacquainted with myself than in finding someone new to accommodate. There's a peace in eating dinner at whatever hour you feel like it, in watching what you want on TV, in making plans that only have to make sense to one person. I wasn't opposed to eventually sharing my life again. I just wasn't going to rush into it because being single made me uncomfortable. One Saturday in October, I was at a hardware store comparing pipe wrenches I didn't need when I ran into Tom, Sarah's husband. We'd met a handful of times over the years, backyard barbecues and birthday parties, the kind of peripheral friendship that exists because your wives are close. He looked good, fully recovered from the appendicitis that had precipitated Sarah's middle-of-the-night confession. He seemed genuinely glad to see me, and we talked for 20 minutes in the aisle between plumbing supplies and electrical fixtures. He told me Sarah still felt guilty about how everything went down, that she worried I resented her for blowing up my marriage. I assured him I didn't, that she'd done me a favor even though it hadn't felt like one at the time. Tom nodded, relief visible on his face. She's a good person, he said. She just couldn't live with staying quiet. I told him I knew that Sarah's honesty had hurt but it had also freed me, and freedom's worth the price of temporary pain. Before we parted ways, Tom said something that stuck with me. You handled that whole situation with a lot of class, Marcus. A lot of guys would have burned everything down on their way out. I shrugged, uncomfortable with praise for doing what felt like basic decency. Burning things down just leaves you standing in ashes, I said. I wanted to walk away clean enough to build something new. Tom clapped me on the shoulder, told me to take care of myself, and we went our separate ways with a promise to grab a beer sometime that we'd probably never follow through on but felt good to make anyway. December arrived with that particular kind of cold that makes you grateful for working furnaces and hot coffee. I picked up extra shifts because the holidays make some people spend money they don't have on repairs they've been avoiding, and I wasn't opposed to fattening my savings account. One evening, I was finishing up a job in Squirrel Hill, replacing a water heater that had given up the ghost on the coldest night of the year, when the homeowner offered me a beer and asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. Her name was Lauren, mid-30s, a nurse who worked nights at UPMC and had just bought the house after a divorce of her own. We'd talked while I worked, the easy conversation that happens when one person is fixing something and the other is grateful for the competence. She had a straightforward way of talking that I appreciated. No games, no fishing for information, just direct questions and honest answers. I accepted the dinner invitation, partly because I was hungry and partly because something about her felt safe in a way I hadn't encountered in a long time. We ate spaghetti at a kitchen table covered in paperwork she was too tired to file, and we talked about the strange territory of starting over when you'd planned to be finished. She'd been married 5 years, no kids, and her ex-husband had decided he wanted to find himself, which apparently required finding himself with a 24-year-old yoga instructor. I told her about Emily, about Derek, about the phone call that changed everything. She listened without judgment, nodding in places that suggested she understood the specific flavor of that particular betrayal. When I left that night, she walked me to the door and said if I ever wanted to grab coffee sometime, as friends, she'd like that. I said I'd like that too, and I meant it. I drove home thinking about how connections happen when you're not forcing them, when you're just living your life and someone else is living theirs and the orbits happen to intersect. I didn't know if Lauren and I would become friends or something more or just two people who had dinner once and went back to being strangers. But I liked that I didn't need to know, that I could let it unfold without a blueprint. Christmas came and went quietly. I spent it with my parents, who didn't ask about Emily except to confirm we were still divorced, and I gave them the short version that spared everyone the messy details. My mom hugged me longer than usual, the way mothers do when they know you're carrying something heavy but can't carry it for you. My dad and I watched football and didn't talk about anything important, which was its own kind of comfort. On the drive home, I thought about how this time last year I'd been married, oblivious, working overtime to buy presents for a woman who was giving her attention to someone else. The contrast didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me grateful I wasn't there anymore. New Year's Eve, I stayed home by choice, not by default. I made a decent dinner, poured a glass of whiskey I'd been saving for no particular occasion, and I sat on my couch watching the city lights through my apartment window. When midnight came, I toasted to nothing specific, just to making it through a year that had tried to break me and finding out I was harder to break than I'd thought. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, from Rick checking in, from my mom reminding me she loved me. Nothing from Emily. That absence felt like progress. January brought Lauren back into my life in a way that felt natural rather than forced. We started meeting for coffee on weekends when our schedules aligned, talking about everything and nothing, building the kind of friendship that doesn't demand more than it offers. She had a laugh that reminded me what lightness felt like, and a way of calling me on my bullshit that was refreshing after years of tiptoeing around someone's feelings. We weren't dating, not officially, but we weren't not dating either. We were just two people who enjoyed each other's company without needing to label what that meant. One February afternoon, she asked me if I'd ever consider getting married again someday, not to her, just in general. I thought about it, really thought about it, and I told her the truth. Maybe, I said. If I found someone I could trust completely, someone who showed up consistently, someone who chose me on the bad days, not just the good ones. But I'm not in a hurry. I'd rather be alone than settle for less than that. She nodded, satisfied with an answer that didn't promise anything but didn't close any doors either. Spring arrived the way it does in Pittsburgh, tentatively, with false starts and backsliding, but eventually convincing. I started taking on bigger jobs, ones that required crews and planning and the kind of coordination that reminded me I was good at what I did. My savings account grew. My apartment started feeling less temporary and more like home. I bought a new couch. A real one from a furniture store instead of something off Craigslist, and I felt absurdly proud of myself for that small marker of stability. One April morning, I got an email from Patricia Chen, my attorney, forwarding me something she thought I should see. It was a court filing, a petition from Emily requesting a modification to our divorce decree. I felt my stomach drop, that old anxiety returning in a rush. But when I read the details, I realized it wasn't about changing anything material. She was requesting to formally restore her maiden name, to legally stop being Emily Webb and go back to being Emily Carson. Patricia's note at the bottom said this doesn't require your consent or your involvement, just wanted you to be aware. I sat with that information for a while, trying to figure out how I felt about it. Eventually I landed on something like relief. Emily taking back her old name felt like a final admission that what we'd had was over, that she was moving forward too in whatever way she could. I emailed Patricia back with a simple thanks for the heads up, and I filed the email away in a folder I'd probably never look at again. That chapter was closed, and I was fine with it staying that way. By summer, Lauren and I had transitioned from friendship to something more intentional, though we were taking it at a pace that would have frustrated our younger selves. We'd learned the hard way that rushing doesn't build anything stronger, it just gets you to the breaking point faster. We spent evenings cooking dinner together, weekends hiking trails neither of us had explored before, quiet mornings reading newspapers and not needing to fill every silence with words. It wasn't the desperate passion of new love. It was the steady warmth of two people who'd been cold before and knew how to appreciate heat that didn't burn. One Saturday evening, we were sitting on her porch watching the neighborhood wind down its day when she asked me if I was happy. Not content, not fine, but actually happy. I considered the question seriously because Lauren deserved serious answers. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Not in the way I thought happiness would look, but in a way that feels more solid. Like I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. She smiled, reached over and squeezed my hand, and said, "Good, because you deserve it." And maybe I did. Maybe we all deserve happiness after we've survived the unhappy parts. Maybe the measure of a man isn't whether he avoids getting hurt but whether he heals cleanly when he does. I'd been hurt, badly, by someone I'd trusted completely. But I hadn't let that hurt turn me bitter or closed off or cynical about whether good things could happen. I'd just learned to be more careful about who I trusted, more intentional about what I built, and more willing to walk away from anything that felt like it was costing more than it was worth. Emily called one more time, in August, almost a full year after that coffee shop meeting where I'd said no to trying again. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message in my truck before heading into a job. Her voice sounded different, steadier, less desperate. She said she wanted me to know she was doing better, that she'd been in therapy, that she was learning to forgive herself even though she knew I might never forgive her. She said she'd met someone new, someone who made her want to be better, and she hoped I'd met someone too. She ended with, "I'll always be grateful for the years we had, and I'm sorry for the way they ended. Take care of yourself, Marcus." I saved the message, not because I planned to listen to it again but because it felt like the real ending, the one where both people acknowledge what was and accept what is. I didn't call her back. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. But I was glad she was doing better, glad she'd found someone, glad we'd both moved on to lives that didn't include each other. That's what successful divorces look like, not reconciliation but mutual release. So here's what I learned from the whole experience, the affair, the divorce, the year of rebuilding. I learned that loving someone doesn't obligate you to accept their worst behavior. I learned that walking away can be an act of self-respect rather than an act of giving up. I learned that starting over is terrifying but possible, and that the life you build from the rubble can be stronger than the one that collapsed. I learned that some people tell you the truth because they care about you, even when that truth destroys your peace, and those people are worth keeping. I learned that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone. Most importantly, I learned that I'm capable of more than I thought I was. More strength, more resilience, more capacity to heal and try again. Emily's affair didn't break me. It broke us. And from that breaking, I got the chance to become someone I'm actually proud of. Not someone perfect, not someone without scars, but someone who faced a hard thing and came through it without losing himself. That's worth more than any marriage certificate ever was. These days, I wake up in a home that reflects my choices, next to a woman who chooses me every day, doing work I'm good at for money I earn honestly. It's not a fairy tale. It's better than that. It's real, it's earned, and it's mine. And if you'd told me 2 years ago that this is where I'd end up, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I am anyway, proving that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you creates space for the best thing to happen next. If you're going through something similar right now, if someone you trusted has betrayed you and you're standing in the wreckage wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, let me tell you something. You will. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. You'll wake up one morning and realize the pain doesn't own you anymore. You'll meet someone or do something or just sit with yourself and recognize that you're okay, actually better than okay. And on that day, you'll understand that the person who broke your heart did you a favor by showing you who they really were before you wasted any more of your life on them. So here's my final question. When someone shows you who they really are, do you believe them the first time, or do you give them a second chance to prove you wrong? And if they ask for that second chance, do you owe them the opportunity, or do you owe yourself the protection? Think about it. And whatever you're going through right now, whether it's similar to my story or completely different, I hope you choose yourself first. Because at the end of the day, you're the only person who's guaranteed to be there for the whole journey. Make sure you're worth showing up for. 3 years after Sarah's phone call changed everything, I stood in a different house with different keys in my pocket, watching Lauren paint our bedroom wall a shade of blue she'd picked because it reminded her of calm water. We'd bought the place 6 months earlier, a small ranch on the outskirts of the city with good bones and a yard big enough for the dog we were planning to adopt. The mortgage was in both our names, split down the middle, equal partners in a project we'd both chosen deliberately. Lauren set down her roller and turned to look at me, paint flecked across her cheek like freckles. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, and I realized I'd been standing in the doorway just watching her work. "I'm thinking this is what it's supposed to feel like," I said. She smiled, the kind that reaches all the way to her eyes, and went back to painting. We didn't need more words than that. Marriage wasn't something we'd rushed into. We dated for a year before moving in together, lived together for another year before I proposed on a random Tuesday because the moment felt right rather than waiting for a significant date. The proposal wasn't elaborate, no flash mob or stadium screen, just the two of us hiking a trail we'd walked a dozen times before. I stopped at a clearing where you could see the whole valley spread out below, and I asked her if she'd want to keep doing this with me for the rest of our lives. She said yes before I finished pulling the ring from my jacket pocket. We got married at a courthouse on a Thursday morning with just our parents present, then had lunch at a restaurant that didn't require reservations. It wasn't romantic by traditional standards, but it was honest, and honest had become my highest standard for anything worth building. Lauren understood that. She'd been through her own version of betrayal and come out the other side wanting the same things I did: clarity, consistency, someone who showed up on purpose. The thing about second marriages, or second chances at love generally, is that you bring wisdom you paid for in the first attempt. I knew now what mattered and what didn't. I knew that attraction fades but respect doesn't have to. I knew that problems don't solve themselves just because you ignore them long enough. I knew that trust is built in small moments, not grand gestures, and that the person who makes coffee the way you like it without being asked is more valuable than the person who buys expensive gifts to apologize for being absent. Lauren and I had built something solid not because we were perfect but because we were intentional. We had weekly check-ins where we talked about anything bothering us before it could fester into resentment. We maintained separate friendships and hobbies because we understood that healthy people made healthy partnerships. We split responsibilities based on preference rather than gender roles, which meant I did most of the cooking and she handled the finances because that's what each of us was better at. It wasn't complicated. It was just two adults treating each other like teammates instead of opponents. I still worked as a pipe fitter, still came home with dirt under my nails and stories about impossible repair jobs. Lauren still worked night shifts at the hospital, still came home exhausted but fulfilled by work that mattered. We didn't always sync up perfectly, but we made it work because making it work was the point. Some mornings I'd wake up to find her asleep on the couch still in scrubs, too tired to make it upstairs, and I'd cover her with a blanket and let her sleep. Some evenings she'd have dinner waiting even though she'd worked a double shift because she knew I'd had a rough week. I ran into Emily one last time, completely by accident, at a grocery store near the old neighborhood. She was in the produce section examining avocados with the focus people use when they're trying to look busy. I almost walked past without saying anything, but something made me stop. "Hey Emily," I said, and she looked up startled. For a second we just stood there, two people who used to share a life now sharing only a moment in a supermarket aisle. She looked good, healthier than the last time I'd seen her, and she introduced me to the man standing next to her as her fiancé. His name was Michael, and he had an easy smile and a handshake that wasn't trying to prove anything. We made small talk for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be polite but short enough to avoid awkwardness. Before we parted, Emily said something I hadn't expected. "Thank you, Marcus. I didn't understand it at the time, but you were right to walk away. I needed to fix myself before I could be good for anyone." I told her I was glad she'd figured that out, and I meant it. That night I told Lauren about the encounter, and she asked how it made me feel. "Grateful," I said. "Grateful that I chose myself when it mattered. Grateful that saying no to her led me to saying yes to you." She kissed me then, soft and certain, and we went back to the ordinary evening we'd been having before I brought it up. That's what peace looks like, not fireworks or dramatic revelations, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing you made the right choice. So if you're wondering whether I ever regretted divorcing Emily, whether I ever wished I'd given her that second chance she begged for, the answer is no. Not once. Not even on the hard days when Lauren and I disagreed about something, or when money was tight, or when life just felt heavy. Because even on our worst day, what we have is built on truth, and truth is a foundation you can actually build on. The lesson I'd give to anyone facing what I faced is simple. When someone shows you they don't value what you bring, believe them and move on. Don't wait for them to see your worth. Don't diminish yourself trying to make them appreciate you. Just walk away with your dignity intact and trust that someone else will recognize what you offer without needing to be convinced. Life's too short to spend it with people who make you feel optional. Sarah and Tom are still married, still happy from what I can tell through the occasional social media update. She reached out on my wedding day to Lauren with a message that said, "I'm so happy you found someone who deserves you." I wrote back thanking her again for the hardest gift anyone had ever given me, the truth at the cost of her own comfort. Some people change your life by what they give you. Others change it by what they take away. Sarah did both. These days I measure success differently than I used to. It's not about the size of the house or the newness of the truck or whether people think I've got it all together. It's about whether I can look at myself in the mirror and respect who I see. It's about whether the person sleeping next to me knows the real me and chooses to stay anyway. It's about building a life that doesn't require me to ignore warning signs or make excuses for someone else's behavior. Emily's affair didn't ruin my life. It redirected it towards something better than what I had, which wasn't as good as I'd convinced myself it was. Sometimes the worst thing that happens opens the door to the best thing that could happen. You just have to be brave enough to walk through that door instead of sitting in the ruins mourning what you lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.